Hello and welcome to Infinity. I'm Charlie Seraphin. For the next half hour, we're going to be exploring psychic abilities in children. Our guest is Tamara Cohen, a graduate of Tufts University who's lived in Nepal, among other places. As a child, Tamara was an experimental subject in parapsychological investigation at Stanford Research Institute. She co-authored with her mother Judith Scutch the book Double Vision. Are all children naturally psychic?
I think that's a matter of opinion, up for debate, but as far as I'm concerned, actually, first you have to define what you're calling psychic.
Okay, my first question is, what do we mean when we say psychic?
That's a good one.
Okay.
All I can say is what I mean when I say psychic is being intuitive, being able to sense people's thoughts or pick up people's emotions, and it goes in very different gradations and levels. You can have someone who's extremely telepathic who can pick up someone's thoughts, or someone who's precognitive who can tell what's going to happen in the future, or someone who's clairvoyant who can tell what's happening at that moment but in a different place. And I guess there are different degrees in psychic abilities. I think all children are innately very intuitive, and that's how I define psychic.
What can children do in that area naturally, or most children, that as adults we forget how to do?
Well, you know, the bond that we know of between the mother and child is very, very strong. And when that starts to be severed, I think that's where the forgetting starts to take place, depending upon the mother and the father's concept of intuition and what is appropriate in society and what isn't. For instance, if a child starts to have dreams and that come true, it's very hard to ignore that. But often parents get scared of it and say, oh, that didn't really happen. And they push it away. So you start to socialize and forget those kind of things and think, yes, this was my imagination. And then as you get older, we kind of translate it into what we call hunches, I believe. And we say, oh, I have a hunch about something, instead of calling it psychic, because that becomes fearful. And so I think children just are naturally and innately sensitive to things that they pick up on, and then they also get, in the same psychic kind of intuitive way, pick up things that aren't accepted socially in whatever set they're in. I think, for instance, California in general is more open to psychic than, for instance, New York, where I grew up.
What in your childhood, if we can go back, can you give some of the examples and some of the things that you were involved with in terms of your psychic ability, and were you able to retain it longer than most children do?
Well, my mother got very, very interested in the field of parapsychology, and she blames me for that, and I blame her for that. She insists that as a child I used to answer her questions before she asked them, and I do remember thinking that my mother had very leaky thoughts, or that she thought very loud, because in my mind I could hear her, and I was sure she had asked me a question out loud, and she insists, and people around her insist, that she hadn't. So she got very involved in researching, and she started researching parapsychology, and she started a foundation called the Foundation for Parasensory Investigation, where I became her guinea pig, sending me off to scientists to be experimented. And I was experimented first at Maimonides Dream Lab, and then later at Stanford Research Institute. But our whole apartment, and I did live with my mother and father got divorced, but our whole apartment became a center for lots of different people coming in, from psychics to scientists to frauds to, anything and anyone. So I was in that atmosphere, and it was very accepted. It wasn't until later where I started looking around, seeing that perhaps this wasn't something everyone accepted.
What did the scientists who tested you find?
I'll never know. They felt that I was very gifted and that I had high clairvoyant abilities, and they would put me in a room, for instance, with an envelope, and there was a picture inside the envelope, and I was supposed to undergo 4 different conditions to determine what was in the envelope. And one of the times I was in a soundproof room with the envelope in my hand, and I was supposed to close my eyes and get a picture of what was inside it. And another one, I had strobe lights flashing at me. My eyes were closed. Another one, I had different music in each ear, so different circumstances. And I guess I did very well, or according to them. I originally thought of it all as a game, and until it became a performance and a test, then I started getting a little bit nervous about it and thinking, oh, I'm supposed to produce good results. And that's when a lot of things started changing.
Have you been tested recently, and does it carry through?
I won't be tested. I don't, for me, I ran out of any enthusiasm for being tested. It's fine for scientists, and I think that there's a lot of good reason to do testing, but for me myself, I don't enjoy it at all, and I would rather do something with whatever I have than be tested for it. And I don't care whether I'm psychic or I'm not. That's the main point for me. People put such an emphasis on, are you psychic? Can you do this? Can you do that? And it doesn't matter either way to me. I'd rather use whatever I have in my own life that suits me and that's there for me.
Do you still have that ability with your mother?
Well, the thing I do best with my mother is I always know when she's calling on the phone. No matter where I am, the phone just has a certain ring. And once I went back to Nepal a couple of years ago, and the first time I lived there were no telephones anywhere where I was, and last time there was. And I had sent her a letter leaving the phone number with it, and of a hotel. And one night at 2 a.m, I woke up and I heard the phone ringing downstairs, all the way down and out into another building, and I knew it was my mother on the phone. And no one answered it, but sure enough, the next day I called home, and it was her. So they're little things like that, and then there's some bigger stories. But basically, yes, it's still, I'm very in tune with her.
Can we differentiate between imagination and psi or psychic ability?
Well, as I say, I'm not a scientist, so I'm not a good person to tell you the difference between the two. As far as I'm concerned, whenever I get into a state where, for me, I can visualize either something happening in my own life. It's hard to say whether I visualize it and then it happens, or I visualize it just because it's going to happen. It's usually in the same kind of state as creative. When I do artwork, it's a similar feeling. So they may be connected, and they also may be connected in the real world. And that's how we do make things happen. So I don't have a scientific answer for it.
Many children have imaginary playmates. I don't recall this specifically, but I'm told about it by my mother, that when I was a child, I had a dog, and no one else could see the dog except me. And we had to go and let the dog out and let the dog in. We had to feed the dog. We had to do a lot of things. And it was not just a casual passing kind of thing, that my mother to this day says there was a real intensity about my relationship with that dog. It was extremely, very serious thing to me. The question is, when children do that, are they seeing something that adults aren't seeing, or is that just a function of their imagination?
Again, I don't know. I don't know what other children see. I know for myself, I remember as a child, well, first, I know my mother her sister had an imaginary friend, and I forget her imaginary friend's name, but whenever anyone would sit at a certain chair, her sister would scream, "No, no, Shirley's sitting there," whatever the name is. Mm-hmm. And my mother tells a story, although I don't remember the specific time, where she came into my room and she heard me talking to someone. And every night I'd usually sing about my day's events, and she'd spy at the door. But this time I was really talking to someone, and she came in and asked me who I was talking to, and I was about 3, and I said, "I'm talking to my friend." And she said, "Oh, do you have a little imaginary play friend?" And I said, No, it's my friend. It's not little." And she said, "It's not little. Oh, is it bigger than a bread box?" "Much bigger than a bread box." And she went up and up and up and said, "Is it bigger than me?" I said, "Much bigger than you." And finally I said, "My friend's bigger than the whole world." And she said, "Well, can I see your friend?" And I said, "No, Mommy. You can't see my friend outside, but my friend is everywhere." And I remember that feeling really well, of just a connection with some part of myself that was my best friend, that I could talk to and ask questions about how I was supposed to be. So maybe some children project that same feeling out into an animal or into some kind of person, but I remember it for me, it being an inside feeling. And it was, and I still feel that presence inside me.
You and I both had this kind of an experience. Some children who take this experience to what others consider extremes are diagnosed as having problems. And sometimes people are even institutionalized for having friends that they talk to that other people can't see.
Yeah, I think that's so. It's just, I mean, all of these are such difficult issues because nothing has been proven either way, and I don't know that there are scientific means to prove these things. But it depends upon how well you know how to deal in the world as well, the world that we've all accepted as our shared reality at this time. And as it changes, as scientists prove certain things and we take a leap in what we believe to be true, then perhaps some of the people in the insane asylums will be able to start filtering out. Or perhaps they're insane. It's a very hard thing to say. I just know that you need a balance. You need to have a sense of what your imaginary world is and also know how to live in this world and where the two can connect.
Since there are similarities in what people experience, whether it's with a playmate, an imaginary playmate, an imaginary pet, a piece of you that you can talk to that's as big as all the world, where do those things come from? Do you think that it's random chance that someone who grows up in New York and someone who grows up in California and they're both 3 or 4 years old, that the two children can have similar experiences just by nature of what? Where does it start?
Well, there's the Jungian psychological explanation of the collective unconscious, where we all share in our collective unconscious shares in the memory of specific archetypes and archetypal figures, which it draws on through different stages of a person's development. And then there's a more spiritual theory, which is we all are one in the first place, and that the being inside us, which some people call God, some people call a Holy Spirit, depending upon which level you go to, we do all share the same images because we are all one. So there are a lot of different ways to look at it. And then there are other people who would say, oh, it's all a bunch of garbage and coincidence. And maybe that person in California and the child in New York who have the same images have a similar upbringing and saw it on TV. So it depends upon which sect you are of believing these things.
When we talk about gifted psychics, and I think if we can share and realize that could mean a whole lot of things, but based on the definition that we started with, are we talking about people that are born that way, or is that a skill that can be developed?
I think it's both. I think it's like absolutely any other talent. Are people born as good painters, or can you develop to be a good painter? Absolutely any skill has a little bit of each. Some happen to be, and who knows why, born with that ability more developed than others. But at the same time, there is a way that can be taught if anyone's interested in learning that specific field.
Can you talk about some of the work that you've done specifically with children?
Yeah, I would say most of the work that I've done was about 10 years ago, for a period of 4 to 5 years. And I worked with blind children, teaching them how to sense color through their hands, color perception, and also remote viewing, which is, for instance, if you're sitting in this room and I go for a walk and look at things, you can close your eyes and see through your eyes what it is that I'm going to be seeing on my walk. And I started this just really by accident. I got fed up with being an experiment. A subject for psychic experiments. And Dr. Gerald Jampolsky with the Center for Attitudinal Healing was one of the people who had tested me. And we went through a fiasco test where electrodes and needles were stuck in my head and the machine didn't work, and there was a big catastrophe. So in order to make up for it, Jerry said that he would help me find some kids to work with. Actually, he begged me to be in another experiment, and I refused. And finally, he persisted, and that was in color perception. and he blindfolded me and put different pieces of colored paper under my hands, and I had to tell him which color was which, and I guess my accuracy was in the 90% range. And so the two of us thought of him putting me together with blind children. And I did not know what I was doing. As I say, I am not a scientist and have no claims to be. But I ended up playing with these blind children one-on-one and bringing colored pieces of paper to them and having them sense different things from different colored paper. And I didn't want to control what they would sense, so I didn't say, you'll feel heat through your hands. Instead, I said, you may feel heat through your hands, you may get different taste sensations, you may get colors in your mind or pictures, you may, anything you want. And each child actually ended up sensing it through very different ways. One musician, a blind boy who was a musician, ended up, every time he put his hand over certain colors, got different sound vibrations, which reminded him of different instruments for each color. And one very fat girl who really was food conscious got, whenever she put her hand over yellow, she got the taste of lemon in her mouth, and whenever she put her hand over red, it was cherry, and those kind of things. So it really, and then another girl who loved to paint and draw. She was completely blind, but she really loved having paints and touching pictures and paintings, and she would feel different energies moving in different ways, and also heat. And I think scientifically it can be explained by different colors emitting different heat at different levels. But as much as I tried to stick to a scientific approach, they always had 10 million exceptions.
Well, how did that make you feel when this was going on, and you see someone that you know is blind, and they're saying this is blue and this is red and this is green?
Well, it was fun. It felt like a fun game. Most of the children I worked with basically needed companionship, which is why their parents allowed me to work with them in the first place. And I was really learning more than I felt they were, although I imagine it was equal in retrospect. But I was learning that the eyes were not as important as I had thought that they were, even with the psychic background that I've had. And it meant nothing to me except as a way of connecting on another level. And when it started to mean something to the children when we got to remote viewing, that was exciting for me. One child in specific, we were sitting there, and I was with her, and we had another friend go off on a walk and record on her walk the things that she was seeing. And she could go anywhere, to a museum, out in the woods, didn't matter. And the girl, Dina, was sitting with me, and I said, let any image come into your mind, any pictures, any thoughts, just tell me everything. And she started going on a trail of, oh, I see her walking. And I said, you can either take her hand and see through her eyes or see pictures yourself, whichever. And she decided to see through the other woman's eyes. And she started being very flippant and saying, oh, I see her walking down a road, and making up a little story. And suddenly she stopped and she said, wait, I see her looking at something rough. And she said something that has kind of frilly things all over it. And then she really burst into tears and she said, oh, I think that's a tree. And it was the first time in her life she felt like she saw a tree. Now, none of this can be proven, but just from the experience of her thinking she saw it and me watching her go through it, it was very emotional and really exciting.
Have you ever felt that this, it's kind of like, in my mind, your description in particular is it's a door that's been closed, and as you open the door, you open the floodgates to all kinds of sensations and feelings. Is there a meaning? You said before that a lot of the things that you were involved in have absolutely no meaning to you, and as you started to ascribe meaning to them and how am I doing on this test, then it didn't work as well. Is there some overriding significance or meaning to this process, this exploration?
For scientists or for individuals?
For the individuals involved.
Yes, I think anything that anyone is interested leads to another step in anyone's development. But as you say about the door, it reminds me of a situation. As a child, I always heard stories from my mother of people who could see auras, the color energy field around things and people. And I always wanted to see auras. She said these great stories and sounded like great colors, and wouldn't that be a wonderful thing to be able to see auras? And then when I was in 6th grade, there was an emergency in the family, and my mother asked me to send a telepathic message to my grandmother to call home immediately. So I did it the way that I knew how to do it, and that was that. My grandmother called home. And my mother later, for the first time ever, asked me how I did it. No one had ever asked me before how I did it. I just did it because I had to do it. And I told her the way that I did it was I would sit in front of the mirror, stare at myself until I saw all these colors around me, and then the image of me would completely disappear, and then I would know I could send the message. And my mother said, "What colors?" And I said, the colors you start to see around things when you stare at them long enough. And she said, "You mean auras?" I said, No, not auras, the colors you see around people. And she said, "Those are auras." And suddenly I got terrified, and I felt, oh my God, I am those people she was talking about. I didn't realize those were auras, and I blocked it out. And it took me a very long time to ever get back to that state where I could see those colors. And only now, when I'm very sleepy and I'm off guard, does it come back in, because I didn't want to be unusual. And teaching the blind children how to sense color, the first thing I had to say to them is that everyone can do this, and you're strange if you can't. And so immediately they'd be able to do it, because the last thing a child wants to be is different. But the individual, back to that question of the process an individual goes through when they get involved in the psychic, it really depends, as far as I'm concerned, upon how they get involved in it. And the bottom line for me is the psychic and nothing means anything without heart. And if the psychic is just studied as a mind game, then you're going to get involved in the tricks and the skepticism and incredible experiences that you can't even explain to anyone, or they're going to think you're crazy, so what's the point? Or incredible power trips that you can do certain things and everyone's honoring you and thinking you're an amazing person, and it means nothing without the heart. And if the heart isn't involved, bringing you through a process of realizing that the psychic is just another connection back to that, as far as I'm concerned, it's nothing.
Have you ever experimented with yourself to try to do something that didn't involve the heart? Psychic communication, or play the stock market, or go to the racetrack, or anything like that?
It's very funny. As a child, I could always find money. I found money literally in trees, on the buses. Wherever I went, there was money everywhere. And it was a joke in the family. And I'd always give part of it away. It was my own feeling that an exchange had to take place. And whenever people would say, "Oh, I got to get you to the racetracks," or "I got to get you to play poker for money," whatever, I would always lose. But if I didn't have to place a bet, and I knew no one was placing a bet, I could win. And it was not 100% either, but more often than not. And it was that pressure of having to come through for someone. So maybe, I don't know, that it hasn't come up with me to do it for specific reasons. I guess that for me, I don't want to exert that will. That is a will. I'd rather stay in the heart and watch where that brings me.
In some mystical traditions, people are told to hide their abilities from others to avoid the trap of being special. Why would that be?
Because my interpretation of it is that in the mystical tradition, you're back to the same thing, the heart. And when you get closer and closer to the heart, it seems that psychic abilities do increase. It doesn't mean that all psychics are close to the heart. As I say, it's a talent. But it does seem that when you get closer to the heart, as well as you're able to draw better and see better and speak better, that center is also open, the psychic center. So when you show it to people, in our society, it has such a draw of power. This person's more powerful, or they can get me money, or, what can I get from these abilities, that you fall back if you start believing it. And you fall back and become full of that power rather than centered in wanting just the heart. And it's very tricky because it's one of the biggest tests that we get. And when you can tell the future, or when you can make money through this, you're really going to be sought after tremendously if people know it. And you can be swayed. It's just it's being right on the edge.
When you sit quietly, if a voice is heard, do you ever hear a voice? Is there a voice that is your inner voice?
Yeah, it's my inner voice, though.
It's your inner voice?
Yeah.
Do you know if it's the same consistent inner voice that you heard when you were a child?
It is. Yeah, it definitely is. But it's not different from my voice. It's just more of my voice. I don't know if that makes any sense, but it's just fuller. It's older. It's like there's two of me. There's one of me that's been here seemingly forever, that has a full source of knowledge, and there's another of me which we can call ego, which is trying to get back to that place, or get up to that place, develop up to that. And it brings me, the ego is full of the veils. So whenever I'd have dreams that came true, I found it very frustrating because nothing I did could change them. And so I didn't know why I was having them. There was no purpose to them, except for finally I realized they prepared me for certain situations. And the dreams that I did start having to have come true were for bad situations where I needed to be centered in them so that I could do something. Other than that, I prefer not to, because I can't learn what I need to learn through a situation if it's not a surprise. And that voice that I get back to, it just guides me through it more gently. It says, don't worry, you're going to go through this, but you have to go through this. And so it doesn't give all the information at once, although it's easier to get information from other people as to what's going to happen on them.
Do you think there's a way to train someone to hear that voice?
Yes. Yes,
How would you go
definitely.
about doing that?
Well,
especially, let's say you want to start with a child and develop that ability in a child early on.
I don't think you have to develop it in a child. I think you have to keep it open in a child, or not even have to, if there is a way to keep it open. The bottom line, it sounds so kind of artsy-fartsy, but the bottom line is back to the heart again. Meditation, people think you have to sit there and not think, or sit there and listen to voices, or try and see images. If you just sit there and feel love, that's all it is. That's what brings you to each place. And when you feel that feeling, that's meditation. It's not stopping your thoughts, it's just getting back to that. And to meditate, all you have to do is, even if you're in a horrible mood, remember a time where you weren't, where you were feeling love. Remember a person who you're feeling love to. That's meditation, as long as you get back to that feeling. And that's the same thing as the voice. It seems to be where it comes from.
This is Infinity. Remember to keep your mind open and listen to your heart. I'm Charlie Seraphin. Thank you for listening.